Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. And let me first welcome Chris. And I think, Chris, we owe your father a thank you for establishing the new new hospital, an hospital that throughout these many years have treated many Afghans who desperately needed that treatment. So we didn't have the opportunity to thank your father, but we convey that to you. Well, as I was just introduced, I'm Nader. I'm a commissioner in Limbo at the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission. I also chair an organization called FIFA. It's not the football FIFA. Obviously, when you see my body, you can of course understand that. But FIFA stands for Free and Fair Election Foundation, doing a lot of trouble and creating a lot of trouble work for others. I'm not that young, as you can see, but when you look at my gray ears, don't be tricked by that also. I'm not that old either. You know that 40-year age thing in our constitutional condition for the president? In this country, everybody wants to be the president. And if I was old, I would have run for the president that also, not speaking here to you. But these white ears are telling another thing. It's telling another story. In the past 9 years, my days have begun every day with reading stories and reports of horrible incidents that were communicated and were coming to us from the provincial offices of the Human Rights Commission. Incidents of violence and continued violence against innocent people, against poor and weak by the powerful. Those reports have made the beginning of my days. And at the same time, most of those days also continued of hearing complaints of victims of the violence and atrocities. Most of those days and some of the days also ended with the same stories. But today being here with you all is energizing. And thank you, Megan, and the rest of the team here for this TED talk, for actually changing my routine of the day. But I'm supposed to talk today about human rights and justice. Let me begin tell you a story, as Nassim has just told us many good stories. A story of my childhood, at a time in my teenager where I was reading a story in a magazine, in a children's magazine. Story that I don't remember the name of the magazine, but I do remember the story itself. Story of a man from a very beautiful, nice village in a corner of this country from a beautiful valley. An enthusiastic man walking toward his village on an unpaved road. I was reading this story loud at home. I can't read it loud now because if I do that, my wife will kick me out of the bedroom. But at that time, I would read that story louder. This man, while walking on the road, on that unpaved road, he was collecting rocks and stones from that unpaved road, putting them aside, pushing them to the side. While doing that, he had a bag over his shoulder, collecting garbages and putting them into his bag. Another old man watching him while walking together. After a while, he looked at him and called on him, "Hey man, what you do? Why are you pushing these stones to the corner of the road? Why are you collecting these garbages?" The enthusiastic man turned to him and said, "Well, I removed these rocks and stones from the road, so when the car passes, they do not hit pedestrians, and the road is clean, and there's no obstacle for those cars to pass easily. And I collect these garbages to make sure that the way to our village is clean." The old man stand and looked at him and said, man, such a waste, such a waste. And then he told him, you cannot bring spring just by one flower. For our international audience here, in Afghanistan, spring is a symbol of a new beginning, an end to the hardship, an end to the harsh winter, and a change in the cycle of life. So for him, we have this saying, "Bayak gol bahar namishod." You can't bring with one flower spring. You can't change everything just by yourself if others are not doing that. When I finished reading this last line, and I was reading it loud, my mom, just sitting at the corner of the room, called me and said, read back that last sentences. And I read it again. You can't bring spring just by yourself and by one flower. You can't change things just by one individual. And my mom turned to me and said, no, son, this is wrong. This is wrong. This story have a very bad ending. And you shouldn't believe that. If you plant your own flower, you can at least bring to yourself and those around you a sense of and a feeling of spring. So you do what you want to do. You do your part. Others may either follow you or they would start doing their own. And by that way, we will bring that change. So that man, my mom said, and that saying are both wrong. This was my first encounter with some of our false systems of values that have always discouraged individuals to do things, that have always prevented individuals to take initiatives individually on their own, to deliver a responsibility that is directed to them. And that is how our value system have been built up on many areas that have discouraged individuals to take responsibility. Since then, I have continued learning that there are many more of practices that we call it probably our cultural practices, and sometimes wrongly call it religious practices. They're wrong. They're discouraging us to do things. They're trapping us and doesn't allowing us to move on. And in the last 10 years, at least I will give you two of these wrong sayings and wrong practices that I have been hearing time and again as a human rights advocate. The first one is Afghanistan is not a place to talk about human rights. You have to be careful. It's an alien issue. Don't talk about human rights in Afghanistan. And most of the time, you hear some of those saying that is out of ignorance, less information, less knowledge. But there are some who does it intentionally. They does it intentionally because they know that promotion of these values will threaten their space, a space that they have hold on to continue freely committing violence against others, and then still walk with impunity and not to be touched. There are some, unfortunately, international experts also, some of them having walked a few miles with a dog in Afghanistan, and then at the end of the next day felt is an expert on Afghanistan, and then wrote a book. I don't need to tell you the name, but if you want, I can give you the name of the book. And then claiming, well, Afghans don't need human rights and democracy. Don't preach them human rights and democracy. And going around in the houses of parliaments and in globally think tanks and preaching and telling the word that don't tell and bring or talk about human rights and democracy to this tribal, backward people in society, they're all wrong. I know they are wrong because I have traveled and talked to so many of my fellow countrymen and women across this country, to the very far corner of this country that is called conservative, I know those people talking about something. They say, if 50% of our girls and our population cannot go to school, it's a denial of their right. They're denied an access to education, and that's a denial of our right. They know that they say we are a victim of human rights because we are denied an access to education. They want to be part of a decision-making process in their own community, and they are already. They've been centuries and years being part of that. They want to be part of decision-making process at their provincial level and at the country level. They know it's the right and it's a choice. And those who say, no, don't talk about democracy to these people, they're wrong. I've learned that they are wrong. Those who say that these people may not want a dignified life don't know that we are no different. We are the same like many other people, like all other people in this planet. So we also want a dignified life. And that dignified life in a just society, in a free society, where women are not suppressed and pushed to the subclass. And these are women around this country. They are standing up and speaking against those. And each of these women and each of these individuals doing that reminds me that sentence of my mother, saying, plant your own flower. And they're planting their own flower. And that's why I believe that those who say and create these kind of mentalities are definitely wrong. The second example I wanted to give you today is the example of justice. A country with 30 years of war and violence, we hear many political elite in this country, Afghans, and we see many international involved in Afghanistan talking about, well, justice is a luxury issue for Afghans. Justice cannot be brought or talked and spoke about in a wrong place, in a wrong time. Afghanistan is a wrong place for justice. And there's no good time for Afghanistan now to talk about justice. I know they are wrong also. Because just in the last 4 years, going around this country or hearing debriefings from my staff who were assigned to do investigation of the past 30 years of atrocities, I've heard many stories, up to thousands of stories, of individuals, families, and communities, that they long for justice. They want justice, and they long for it not only because they want to seek revenge, but because they see that as a way forward for themselves. They need to face, in a bold way, their past. Those who say, no, don't talk about justice, it's wrong, they don't know that each of these communities and families and individuals, because their stories are so personal, they've lost their loved ones, they saw their villages being destroyed, they've lost all livelihood that they have had. They don't know that each of these communities and these individuals feel that their stories of sufferings are unique. And they want that to be heard. The story of our country of the past 30 years is a story of disconnect and divide. There was no communication between communities. And therefore, what people feel today is that whatever have happened in the past 30 years, they are the only one who have suffered. That smaller community, our community have suffered, our family have suffered. Nobody else in the other part of the country have suffered that way. And therefore, they want whatever comes after that as a remedy, as a reparation to them. So they deserve only. And that's why they never trust their government, because they did not reach out to them and didn't give them all what they deserved. Those who say justice is not something that you should be talking about here, they don't know that this nation has no other way to move forward, but to be able to understand that shared pain that is being existing in the last 30 years across this country. They don't know that this nation has a shared pain. And they have a shared history that is driven by that shared pain. And that's the need for us to challenge and say, we need that justice. You can't tell us that you do not require justice and you don't need justice, and it's wrong to talk about it. I know that facing that history is going to be ugly. It's going to be very brutal. It is a very brutal history. It's going to be very, very painful. But there's no other way for us to move on. If we are to chart a future that we never allow again the same thing to happen to ourselves, to our children, and to our future generation. And therefore, we need to tell those who say it's wrong to talk about that you should shut up and stop talking about this. Walking on this path will not be easy. And many of you know by doing things that are unusual and pushing for those boundaries. I know also by experience. When in last December, but at the same time there are rewards that are coming while doing it. When in last December, when I was put on limbo and I was asked or released of my services by the government, there were a lot of difficulties. There was a stress. In the midst of that difficulty and stress, I received a call from a man from the very far corner of this country. He said he's calling from a host province. His voice behind the phone was an indicative that he is an aged man. He told me on that other side of the phone that, son, don't be discouraged by what has happened to you. Don't give up. Hang in there. Hang in there. When you walk on that path, we know it's a long way. It's difficult. When you walk on that, remember that there are others like me, that they are praying and their thoughts are with you. And you never know that they are joining with you. Now, before he asked me to shut up, I will just give a couple of messages to you, the new community of TEDx in Kabul. So those of you who want to start challenging these wrong sets of values that are promoted to us, you start planting your flower. You begin and do not wait for the others. Start digging some of those false system of values that we have created over years, and start challenging these taboos. And for those of you who are already doing that, don't be discouraged. Hang in there. Hang in there. You never know that other people in other parts of this country or in this planet may do the same thing. I thank you.